Let's roll the cameras. Oh, my lands. Over 1,000. Let's go. And we're playing Clover Star 1. I'm going to play E4. Amy Clover Star. And let's hope we get a Danish gambit. We still have not been able to get a Danish. Nobody seems to take the pawn, and if they do, they don't take the other pawn. Yep, they start thinking, and then they'll play like knight c6 or d6. We've had knight f6 here. What haven't we had here? And there's knight c6. So, those of you who've been very attentive know that there are several options here. There's knight to f3, which transposes into the Scotch. That's fine. There's d5, and I'll talk about that after the game. I keep forgetting to do that. d5 is not as good as it looks. What should we do here? What should we do here? Well, I haven't given you guys much of a choice. I'm saying it's not knight f3, it's not d5. You actually take, right? And I've explained this previously, where it looks bad. Like, why are we letting black establish a knight in the center? Well, that knight has no support, right? And we could later play f4, we could play knight f3. Just a knight in the center this early in the game is not particularly meaningful. It can actually be counterproductive. So we don't want to play f4 yet. What do we play here? Again, we've had this position once before. We want to develop very flexibly. Let's see how black puts his pieces before we decide whether we play f4. What that means is we need to play an inoffensive development move that we will play regardless. And we know we're going to play this move anyway. Yeah, right? Under no circumstances are you not going to play knight c3. If black plays knight f6, that's what we've previously faced. That is a big mistake. And I'll ask you guys if he plays it, which is quite likely, to remind me, they ain't calling me the prophet for nothing, to remind me of what I should do here. And the underpinning here, right, is, I think I found a good analogy here, but I don't remember what that analogy was. But black is developing his pieces, but he's not laying out the exoskeleton, right? Pawns provide the skeleton that create meaning for positioning of the pieces. Right now, the knights are sort of in no man's land, and we can just push them all away with our pawns. Just bowl them over, right? Just send the bowling ball down the lane, f4. That's a committal move, but it's associated with the follow-up. We wouldn't play this move were it not for the follow-up, which is e5. And the knight on f6 has to go back to g8. That is not a total disaster, but it's really bad. And he's going to be in trouble. Now, this knight has to go back here or here. Knight g4 would be further exacerbate the situation. Okay, so knight c6, we're going to go e5. The knight has only one legal square. Well, it's more than one legal square, but only one reasonable square, knight g8. Now we have a big center and we have a development advantage. We also have a slightly weakened king, which means that we can't take the foot off the gas pedal. We have to keep developing very actively, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, so what do we do? Thank you, Minko, for the prime. What do we do? Yeah, just knight f3, and no need for anything crazy. Now, I think this position occurred in our previous game. d6 is what black should do. He does. You see, these players have begun to play a little bit better. And now I explained in the previous game that when you've got these positions, people often assume that queen trades are inherently bad. And that's not quite the case. Sometimes a queen trade is actually okay because the remaining pieces can still provide you a very big initiative. That means we don't have to move our queen out of d1. We are okay with a queen trade potentially, but let's set that queen trade up. How can we ensure that in the event of d takes e5, the queen trade forces black to lose castling rights? Sorry, that was a pretty convoluted question, but I think some of you understood. And the move is, so bishop c4 is tempting, but the classy move is bishop to b5, preparing for d takes e5. Then we take the queen. Because the knight is pinned, he's got to take with a king. Because we're so ahead in development, we still would have had a strong attack. He goes bishop d7 instead. That's a little passive. Now we don't have to do anything. We can just castle. And look at this f-file. That f-file is where the disaster is going to happen. He's helping us by taking. What should we take back with, the knight or the pawn? We should, of course, take with a pawn. There's no need to take with a knight. Why trade unnecessary pieces and help him out? Yeah, so we just take with a pawn. And 1 sec, let me just write this down. Okay. So he's in huge trouble. Look at this pawn. It's containing the knight. This f file is disastrous for black. This knight can go out to g5, and he goes queen to e7. Now, my sort of pattern recognizer immediately supplies the move, because I associate queen e7 in the opening. When you've got a knight on c3 and he plays queen e7, there's immediately in the snap of a finger a move you should be looking for, knight d5. But because we have moved our pawn away from f2, you have to also put a red flag there, right? That creates certain tactical possibilities along this diagonal. So we have to consider knight d5, queen c5 check. And at first blush, you might be like, oh no, we lose a piece, because that is a fork against the bishop. But let's not stop there. If you look at that position carefully, you'll notice that that is a phantom threat. Can somebody explain to me what I'm talking about here? Yeah, because knight takes c7 is going to be a fork. And not only is that going to fork the rook, that's going to fork a queen, which may land on b5. In fact, that very likely he will play queen c5 check, because one of the common mistakes at this level is players are much better at detecting tactical patterns, but not as good at calculating them deeply, and not as good at figuring out when to stop calculating. So they will get attracted by the bishop, and I have this sort of executive control to say, okay, I see that I can win the bishop, but let me make sure that, if I calculate one move further than that, that I'm not missing some sort of a detail. And the game is over. His queen is literally trapped. He has no other spot. He essentially either has to give up the queen where it is for a piece, or he's got to take the bishop, and the game is over. So this isn't rocket science per se. It's a mentality thing, right? You have to force yourself in situations with extenuating circumstances. Like here, white is up in development, so it's very likely that there's going to be a lot of tactics in the air. So that's why you have to keep calculating, and you have to be opportunistic here. And yeah, thank you all, PDX. Yeah, I mean it's pretty straightforward. Also, like, this is relatively common. Yeah. So, well, knight d4, yeah, maybe he should play that, but then we can... Yeah, probably knight d4 is the best move, but then we take his bishop, and we can even take his knight with our queen, Yoke piece. Yep. He's realizing it. He's realizing it. And I remember an early game, the only time that I ever smothered mated someone in my over-the-board chess career, I think featured something very similar. Let me look up that game. For some reason, I remember that I won the queen in this fashion, but it was a very long time ago, so I might be forgetting. Let me check. I feel like it was a similar scenario. Oh, well, it was similar, but it wasn't worth showing. It's okay, so he finds it. Yeah, knight d4 is the best move, relatively speaking, but it's not going to help him. Now, there are several options here. We can play queen takes d4, being up a piece in the endgame. No problem with that. But let's find the surgical move. The surgical move is simply to realize that now the knight is pinned by the bishop, but there's a problem here, which is that he can unpin himself with check by taking the knight. But if you look very carefully at the situation of his king, and the fact that the queen is x-raying the king, I always advocate, look for those x-rays. Anytime your queen, your opponent's king is in the same file, no matter how many pieces are between them, that should be factored in. And we have a very simple move here that preserves the queens and still wins the piece. What am I talking about it? What am I talking about, rather? Yeah, just knight c3. Yeah, I love these kinds of moves. We just drop the knight back, and now we use this pin to immobilize the knight. We're going to pick up the knight. The king is going to be toast, and we're going to be up a piece. Kudos to my opponent for finding this, but he's still completely lost. Right. So I hope the logic makes sense here. Yeah, it's just over. Over red rover. Rook D. I mean, it's a good move. So we can take with a knight. We can take with the bishop. We can take with the queen, and it doesn't really matter. I think the best thing is to take with a knight, because some of you guys... Oh, no. Actually, we have something kind of sexy here. Let's take with the bishop. That's what I assume most of you people are instinctively thinking about, because that sets up a discovered check. The tricky thing with discovered checks is that they can be very appealing, but sometimes you don't have a good one, right? And that may be the case here, unless you sort of really put your imagination, sort of your turn up the creativity dial. What do I notice here? What do I see? I see this. This immediately signals to my brain, fork. Where can this fork be delivered? E5. What's on E5? A pawn. We also have a discovered check. So let's go E6, right? And the rest I don't even calculate. He can certainly take with the queen, but the second thing that this move accomplishes is it opens up another sort of diagonal for the bishop, which allows, and I'll show this after the game, a second discovered check. That is over. That is another super thematic tactical idea. Clearing out a square. And that's the queen, and that's the game. Yeah. Now, if we want to play very precisely, I noticed that G7 is sort of a takeable pawn in some circumstances. So, this is not mandatory, but what should we do? Like, what can we do here in the name of playing aggressively? Yeah, well, Queen G4 is a great move, but what I'm talking about here is Rook takes F8 and Bishop G7. Yeah, no, Black is playing fine. I mean, he's playing very well for his rating, but it's not going to be enough here. It's not going to be enough. Okay. Yeah, Bishop G7. And then we're going to pick up a rook. He'll probably go knight E7. I mean, that's the only way to salvage the bishop. Then we're going to go probably Queen G4. Just go after this pawn. Then goes Rook D8. We can take on D8, actually. That's simple. But we can also just go Queen G4. Go after this pawn. And the fact remains his rook is unsalvageable. Knight H6. So we're going to take this guy. Then we're going to take the rook and then the knight. Yeah, it's crushing. Okay, so he's I don't know if he's going to resign. Speedrun with piece odds. I thought about that, actually. I thought about blundering a piece every game to start. But I felt like that would get repetitive, because the game would keep having one type of arc. I would go for tricks, and eventually I would trick most people below like 1600. But I feel like that would be a little one-dimensional. That's an interesting idea, though. So, to recap, Knight C6, right? Now, D5 is tempting because it attacks the knight, but it closes down the center. And closing down the center in a situation like this isn't always the best idea. We want to keep the center open. That allows us to play aggressively. So this is fine for white. White is slightly better here. But it's a different type of position, more positional type of advantage. And eventually we'll get to the subject of how to play in closed positions. I broached that in the 5-minute speedrun. Okay. So D takes C5, knight takes C5. Now knight C3. Knight F6 is the mistake, and now we go F4. This is all very simple. E5, knight F3, and now bishop B5. So in the event of D takes E5, there's two good ways to play here. There is, I would sort of say, a very concrete approach that goes after immediate material gain. Who can find this concrete approach? No, I'll pull that up, Margarito. Yes, bishop C6, intermediate move. Point is to take on E5 and the knight, forking the two pawns. The drawback of that is that you give up a potentially very valuable bishop. You might be cashing in too soon. And black obviously should defend the F7 pawn. And maybe, you only win one pawn, and this is of dubious quality. Instead, I would advocate very strongly for F takes E5. And you basically play now as if the queens were on the board. What would you do? Well, you develop the bishop, you'd castle long, And despite the absence of queens, you have a huge initiative. I mean, you guys should all see the knight g5s and rook f1. Your pieces, you're not only much better developed, you're so much more active. Okay, Cordy Man thinking about the tier 1. I hope that makes sense. That's why we played bishop b5. Now we castle. Yeah, we'll switch turns. Like, at some point I'll play positionally with white and aggressively with black. I haven't decided where that threshold will be, though. So takes. Black should give this check and go knight g7. At least trying to develop, but this doesn't really help. And we could pile on here by playing knight g5. That's why opening the f-file is so dangerous. Openings like the Vienna revolve precisely around something like this, where we open the f-file for the rook, we castle, and we just pile on to this pawn on f7. Okay. So, queen e7, knight d5, and then essentially this is already crushing. Boom, boom. And yeah, knight d4 is nice, but you know, this move knight c3 is very simple. It's absolutely devastating. Okay, so takes. Now e6 check. That's actually the best move. And had he played f takes e, well, he actually did. That blunders the fork. Had he played queen takes e6, what would be white's best move? This is a tricky position. I feel like some of you are going to fall for a certain trick, because I almost fell for it. Now it appears that, well, knight e5, knight e5 is good. And you can play knight e5 and knight f7. Just fork this and win one of the rooks. That's fine, but if you wanted to exploit the discovered check, you would want to go bishop f6 and win the rook. You would not want to go bishop takes g7 check. That is very tempting. Why is it wrong? Who can explain that to me? How is this not just crushing? You win another rook, you're great. Well, LPXD, you need to listen to yourself. LPX, that's you know, my sort of personal thing, and it would appreciate, you know, that's that. Yeah, so he moves the king and the rook attacks the queen. So these tactical details, right, they are hard to spot. And when you solve a lot of stuff, you're in good form, you notice these things, right? So that's why we'd want to go bishop f6. But instead he took a knight e5 check. And the game is over. Any questions about this game? Any questions about this game? It looks like we're pretty clear. Okay. Let's do one last one. I'll give you guys an encore. How did I develop my tactics? Well, it's not a one-word answer, you know. What if he takes with a queen and then king e8? Well, then it's mate. Bishop f6 and queen takes d8 checkmate. All right, last one. Scanning for tactics the opponent might have. Well, it's the same thing that you do for scanning your own tactics. I need to replace my headphones. They died. Yeah, there's no secret, guys. There's no secret book. It's the only secret is incredibly hard work over many, many years. Okay. No, it's all good. I explained d5. d5 is not bad. And but I just talked about this. Again, d5 is perfectly legitimate. I want to emphasize this is not bad. It might even be the computer's top choice. But it leads to a closed position, and closed positions can be very hard to play. It's very hard to create attacking chances when the center is really clogged up like this. All right.